I love painting portraits and I'm on a journey to improve my portrait painting, and I've been on this journey for about 2 years and it's been slow, but I've seen some progress in my portrait illustrations, especially with the process itself. I had someone write to me on Instagram about how to tackle portrait painting with gouache after seeing my monochromatic portraits, so I thought I would share some tips and show my process for these. And I will go through step by step of one of the faces in this spread, so I'll put timestamps in the description below, but I do really recommend starting by hearing the general tips first because they've honestly helped me so much in my approach to these portraits. So two colours I love to use is dark blue and dark purple mixed with white, and this is my first tip: start with monochromatic portraits. When I first started portrait painting, I felt so overwhelmed by all the colour choices because there's just so many different tones on a face, and so I decided to go down the monochromatic route, which is essentially using one colour and mixing it with white to achieve a series of different values or shades of that colour. But honestly, you can do these in any colour you like. I've also done these in pastel colours. The point is that you're able to achieve a range of different shades from dark to light, the darkest being the colour you select without being mixed with white, and the lightest being white, so you can set that range with different colours. This monochromatic approach is going to help you think about one thing less and concentrate on two things: the accuracy of the anatomy when building the face with paint and the value range of the face, so all the different shades you find on a face from light to dark. So when I look at a face, I pick out what areas are the lightest, and those are going to be white, and then what areas are the darkest. So normally the pupils, sometimes the hair, or the deeper shadows made around the face. And once I've mapped the lightest and darkest areas, I'm able to really work within that range. My second tip is to use the medium you're most comfortable with. I love gouache, so that's why I do these in gouache, but definitely use, if you like watercolor, use watercolor. The principles are going to be the same. I'm going to show you step by step on how to layer with gouache later on one of the other faces, but you can definitely take some of these general tips and apply them to other mediums. Now, layering means that you will go through an ugly phase in your painting, but that's just part of the layering process. Layering the paint does take a bit of practice, but it is easier than it looks, and for beginners with gouache, I would recommend waiting a bit between your layers so that your paint dries, and this will help with that frustration of not being able to control the paint and prevent the paint running into itself. And your first layer is always going to be a bit more thinner in consistency, a bit more watery, so it's that paint that dries quickly, and as you build on top you can thicken the paint a bit more, so you use less water. Never use the paint straight out of the tube. You definitely do want to dilute it with water, but you can dilute it less and less as you go along. My next tip is start small. Starting small was way less overwhelming for me. I tend to paint in sketchbooks, so everything I do is pretty small scale, but when I started these portraits, they were even smaller than this, and I think it helped me gain some control over my painting. I felt like I could do them fairly quickly, which meant I could do more, and so my learning curve was quicker. I would say there is a balance with this though, because too small and you won't be able to really work with the portrait, so a size that feels manageable but still allows you to play as much as possible with the features of the face and the paint. I do these portraits in about a quarter of an 8.5 by 11 inch sketchbook page. Something that happens with gouache very often, and that you can actually see quite clearly in this footage, is that lighter gouache dries darker and darker gouache dries lighter. So that's why I layer and I go back in and I keep adding and retouching, and I realize that I need a bit more lighter areas, so I'll go in with a lighter gouache, and that's just part of the process. My next tip is to choose a really good reference photo. For me, that means choosing photos that have really good light versus dark contrast on the face. If you're beginning your painting journey with portraits, I would avoid photos of faces that have very even lighting and have no dark versus light contrast on them. Having good lighting on a face that creates really interesting shadows and shapes not only makes it more interesting visually, but actually makes it easier to paint because the different shapes that the shadows and the light makes are more apparent, and that's actually easier then to translate into paint because you're able to break down the face into different shapes instead of thinking of it as one whole. And so hopefully you can see on this face that there are different shapes come into play, especially on the forehead, that layering effect, on the chin, on the cheeks. That's where I'm kind of building different shapes on top of each other to create this one unified face. Okay, before we get into the tutorial, my last tip is to find a way to construct a face that works for you, like a specific method. I use the Loomis method in quite a simplified way. I'll link some videos below that I find useful for learning the Loomis method. But essentially with my sketches, I'm not trying to achieve a ton of detail. I just need to ensure that everything is in proportion when I start painting. I tend to cover the sketch really quickly with my first layer of paint, and I can hardly see the sketch through the paint like after the second-ish layer, so it really is just a rough guide. I actually strive more to get the features and the proportions anatomically correct more than getting the face to look exactly like the reference photo I'm painting. A lot of these faces that I paint don't actually look exactly like the references if you compare them side by side, but they do look for the most part anatomically correct so that when I look at them they make sense and they look like a human face. I really would recommend spending some time building faces with pencil until you feel satisfied with constructing a face. Before I started painting faces, I spent some time practicing in pencil and pen and following some Loomis method tutorials so that now when I look at a reference, I'm able to break down that reference photo with the Loomis method and then build on top of that. So let's paint a face together. Now this photo I found on Pinterest and I'll link it below, and I chose this one because I just loved the shadows on the face created by the hat and the sunlight shining on the face. I start by covering the whole drawing with a thin layer of watery gouache of white with just a touch of blue, and as it dries you can see it goes a lot darker. Then with a watered down mid-tone blue I start to map out where all the shadows are on the face, and these layers dry fast because they're very thin, but I do recommend taking it slow and allowing them to dry as much as possible before moving on to the next layer. With a darker blue, I map out all of the deeper shadows on the face and start adding a bit of details of the features so I can see them. I then go back into the skin that is in the sunlight and begin to add a thicker gouache, and it's not pure white, it has a touch of blue in it and it has less water than the first layer, so it's a bit more opaque. I then go back into those shadows and I want to build them out more, so I make them more opaque and I go in with slightly thicker gouache. And when I say slightly thicker, it just means with a bit less water. It's definitely not a thick paste consistency, it just moves around a bit less. And from here I begin to just build my layers. I observe the shapes on the face and start laying down these shapes with paint. And I know at this point that the paint I'm putting down isn't the final layer, so I just keep building. And this is something that doing these faces a few times will teach you. The process of building the layers is really valuable and you don't need to rush to get to that final colour. You can keep building, wait for it to dry and see if it needs to be lighter or darker. And the overall effect looks really good. I have been asked with my layering process with gouache why I don't just lay down the colour that I see, like that final colour, instead of having to work towards it through layers. And I think the layers just allows me to get more depth to the piece that I'm making or painting. It's also a lot less intimidating because you are working towards kind of the answer versus trying to figure out the exact colour paint on the palette with nothing around it to kind of guide you there, if that makes sense. And I also just really like the look of the layers and the different brush strokes too. And as I go through with the layering process, I'll go back in and redefine the features, and you'll see me do this a few times. And this happens because they either get covered with paint as I'm doing the layers, or I realize they need to be darker, so I'll go back in with an even darker color. And it may not look like the most efficient process, but I think with gouache, the nature of this paint, which reactivates with water and it's like differing levels of opacity, this is the best way I found to work with it. And I really enjoy the process actually. So it may not be the most efficient, but I love this layering process and just the way I build the face or build whatever I'm painting. Here you can see me lay down some paint and actually mix it with the paint on the page already. And this is the great thing about gouache, because it reactivates with water. You can actually mix it while you're painting on the page and it will help you create a bit of a smoother gradient effect. Now, I do tend to like more of those brushstroke kind of marks on the page instead of like a smooth gradient, as I had already mentioned. However, it can be useful to do, especially if there's just a slight tone shift and you want to blend it seamlessly together. And as you can see, the light gouache dries darker, so I go back into the skin and add some lighter layers. And here I'm starting to see that everything is coming together. I just need to darken those features a bit more. And this is the last time I do this because I've kind of arrived to where I feel like this is looking like the reference and it has the depth that I want. So I add those in. And then I do the same with the highlights. I don't like to overblend these final layers because I love seeing the brushstroke shapes come through. And here I'm adding some final touches, deepening some of those shadows to just really up that contrast. Sometimes I can overwork these a bit. I do sometimes get a bit carried away with the tiny details, but tiny details bring me so much joy, so I'm going to keep doing it. And here's the completed spread. I really love these faces. I just have so much fun doing them. And I wasn't able to show you the purple faces, my process for those, because I feel like this video just got too long, but I do have the footage, so I can make a video for those. Just let me know, and let me know if you have any questions, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.